talking.
Sorry, I forgot to record.
Thanks, Case. So Case is co-hosting this this kickoff session with me, and we'll be interjecting and hopefully taking point on a couple of questions. What we thought we'd do today would be pretty straightforward. We're operating under the assumption that everybody on this call has had the opportunity to review the videos that our faculty have so graciously put together describing their studios. This is the first time any of those folks have been required and asked to do this. And I, for one, was kind of amazed and impressed at the quality and the kind of personality that everybody brought to those videos. I think they're great. And I think they've done a really solid job of describing what the studios are about. So with that portion of what traditionally we would do in person in a typical year off the table, what we're going to do today is simply start by going around and asking each of the faculty members just to say hello and introduce themselves so that you can kind of put for those of you who are new, can put a face and a name and connect it to the studio that you might be thinking about. I'd also like to introduce Emma Fennell, who coordinates our kind of information portfolio here at the school, and Janice is also on the call, and she will be one of the people organizing the sort. So when everybody votes and makes their choices known, Janice has the unenviable task of working with Adam to sort those out, seat everybody in the appropriate studios, and help distribute that information around. So thank you, Janice, for being here, and thank you, Emma, for being here in support. Once we do introductions, what we'd like to do is just open the floor up for question and answer sessions for anybody who's curious or has something specific to ask about one or any of the studios. And then we'll move to procedural things. Case, is there anything I'm missing?
No, I think you did a fantastic job outlining the schedule for today.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want me to throw it to you so you can prompt faculty?
Keep on going. I'm going to ruin it otherwise.
No, you won't ruin it. I'll tell you what, I'll do ARC and you do LARC.
All right, there you go.
How about that? So in no particular order, but kind of going across the way my matrix is set up, I'll ask that each of the faculty members simply wave, say hi, say a little bit something about themselves, and then we'll move forward. And John, since you're in the corn, I will let you start.
Clear alphabetical bias, that's all I can say. Hello, everybody. Yes, welcome to the strange new world of online graduate education and design. Yeah, the studio, as you can tell, that I'm offering is sort of the byproduct of many years of work I've done in indigenous contexts on the coast and now in the interior with a community that I've been working with for a few years and have developed some, I think, good kind of working relationships with, enough so that they were willing to entrust Sala in the effort to kind of project ideas about what a tribal park might be. I don't have anything more specific to say. I think I'll just leave it at that, except maybe to say that we'll use the story as a kind of foundation for the work. So we'll spend the first 3, 4, 5 weeks really thinking about stories and translating them graphically. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. Chris McDonald. Hello.
There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris McDonald. I think the slightly laconic description that I gave in the video is hopefully pretty clear. So the interesting things about the studio are this collaboration with the profession, which I've done probably half a dozen times over the last few years, working in groups of 3 or 4, which has also been part of that process, and I think is really fantastic. We're going to be doing a fairly large urban design project in the western side of downtown Toronto as the major project. And our collaborators are from this group, the LeMay group, and in particular the LeMay Lab. So you can look up and see their work. I mean, I think they're the largest privately held architectural practice in Canada. But my friend Andrew, who's the key collaborator and also is an ongoing professor at McGill, he somehow manages in the midst of all of that to make a kind of little R&D group within the big corporation. And the only other thing I think that I wanted to say, and I was kind of prompted by some of the guidelines for making the video, is, you know, the first project is kind of a pavilion in the forest. It's your version of the first house that Arthur Erickson designed of his own accord. And so I would just not discourage landscape students from participating, because pavilion in the forest doesn't seem outside of your reach, and it would be great to have some landscape expertise as we move into the kind of urban condition. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. Leslie Van Duzer.
Hi, I'm Leslie Van Duzer, and I know some of you who have come from the ENS program into our graduate program, and I also had the opportunity, thanks to Thina, to meet with the incoming students and give a talk last week, so I've met quite a few of you in that way. My studio is called Accommodating Wanderlust. It comes about because, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going absolutely crazy not being able to travel. And this, I think it's an art written beautifully. It's an art to be able to travel in your imagination. And I would like us all in my studio to cultivate that art. So the project will involve students picking a route that will bring them between two distant points around the world. Our paths will be crossing, which will offer opportunities for collaboration if people so desire. We'll be designing an accommodation for travelers in the origin city of each student's travel. But the studio will really focus a lot on how we pick up experiences, precedents, which doesn't just mean famous buildings we might see along the way, but any experience we have in any place, how we pick those up and make them into, translate them into something useful for the design process. So as I mentioned to the students I lectured to, I'm working on a new book called Typecasting, and it's all about types and precedents, how we make use of the things we encounter in the world. So anyway, I look very much forward to traveling with those who come into my studio. We'll be in a different place. We'll be moving throughout the term. Thank you.
Great.
All right, to switch things up, we'll do two landscape architecture faculty now. So I'll start with Daniel Rohr.
Hello, I'm Daniel. Welcome everybody. My studio this year is called Gardens Are Buildings, and I'm basically hypothetically saying that maybe landscape architects should start initiating a site design before the architect starts designing. So turning it away, basically turning it around. I've written an article for this studio and created a tool how that could be carried out at the different levels, at the garden scale, at the block scale, and at the city scale. And we'll be looking individual garden scale, the students will design alone, and then they will be designing at the block and the city scale in small and larger groups. And the whole idea of this studio is that we start with the small scale to the large scale, which is the opposite than what we normally would be doing. We normally would be designing from the large scale down to the small scale. And that is really all I have to say about this studio. The only other thing I would like to say is that I would be very happy to see a lot of architects in the studio. So to see a balanced studio would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll pass it along to Annie Liang.
Hello, so I'm Annie. I have a MLA from the GSD and a Benz from UBC. I've also practiced at a range of offices such as MBVA, Snowetta, and Sasaki, and most recently at HAPA. Currently, we've started a nonprofit called Eudaimonia Network, and we're trying to do regenerative development on Haida Gwaii to build trails in a longhouse with the old Masset village. And the studio I'll be teaching is called Lifeways. And we are focused on capturing the imaginations of both local community members and prospective investors. And so we'll be using animation to reimagine a new future for the old Masset village. And so it would be great to have both architecture and landscape architecture students sign up. So, yeah.
Thanks, Annie, and welcome back. And now in teaching capacity, very excited to have you be part of this round of vertical studio offerings. Blair, I'll toss it back to you.
Great. I'm going to invite Danny and Chad to introduce themselves.
Maybe we can talk at the same time, Danny.
Simultaneously. We're probably not side by side in anyone's view, are we?
Nope.
That's okay. I'm Danny. I am an architect in Vancouver. I also graduated from SAWA, and Chad and I taught a vertical studio last fall. Chad, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Chad. I run a small practice in Vancouver here. Spend time on both landscape architecture, curatorial work.
Yeah, Chad and I collaborate on a variety of different projects throughout the year, and so we're pretty excited to be back teaching again this term. And our studio this year is about Cascadia, which is the loosely defined biogeoclimatic region stretching from Alaska down the coast, including UBC, down to Northern California.
I think Danny looks like he's a bit frozen there. I'll just pick up and say that one thing we didn't include in the video was just a bit of a structure about how the studio will proceed throughout the semester, and that's that we're going to have a kind of overlay of a seminar with an underlay of regular studio assignments. And if there's specific questions about that, we can answer those later. But that will include inviting a number of people who are, let's loosely call them experts or specific voices to the region. Did you have anything else, Danny?
No, and just per our little intro, there'll be some, a couple of more radical experimental design exercises at the beginning of the studio, looking at bringing different Cascadian beings together in conversation and looking at the kinds of structures or conditions and rituals that might allow them to sort of meet in a political sphere and a sort of reimagined political sphere. And it will culminate with the imagining of a new sort of parliament for a general assembly of Cascadia, sort of a hypothetical new, maybe building, maybe condition, maybe system, maybe story, in which sort of Cascadian politics can sort of be imagined.
Great. You two set? Awesome. Thank you, guys, and thank you for joining us again to deliver a studio. We're excited to see how that goes. Inga Roker, come on down.
Oh.
Yep, you're good.
I'm good. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Inga Roker, and I teach the Mismatch Studio this fall. It's a studio where we look at the mismatch between housing which is delivered and housing which is actually needed. And this is a growing concern in recent years, that how we build, what we build is mainly defined by the financing industry rather than what the people's needs are. And there's this mismatch between what is really needed and what is delivered, which we are working with a housing provider, and their big concern is that as we are in this constant housing crisis, there's not even time to discuss what is really needed out there. And to explain in just one sentence, if we look at who we are as a society and who we live, from patchwork families to people with disabilities, this is all not considered when we see what in the housing which is provided in Vancouver or in many other cities. And so we are really looking into what would actually be, what has to be different qualitatively if we design housing, what is needed, rather than just on financial measures.
Great, thank you, Inga.
All right, Fionn Byrne, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. My name is Fionn. I can confirm for everybody that I'm just as nervous on the video interface as I am in person, which is a bit surprising. I thought it would have been the opposite. You've seen the video for my studio. Hopefully it's a pretty clear description. I guess anybody who's listening, if you don't get an opportunity to ask your question, you can of course send me an email and I'll try to send a quick answer back. But a couple points that I didn't cover: we're going to be working in groups and individually, and like a lot of other faculty out there, the studio is open to students from all the departments. Looking forward to meeting the 14 students on Friday. Thanks.
Thank you. Blair, you got two more, I think.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Fionn. I actually have three more. Up next is Professor Fujita.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to continuing students, and welcome again to the students that were in the intro workshop that I had the pleasure of spending the last week with Athena. My name is Madi, and I will be teaching the studio Living in Bubbles. And I am a professor here at Sala. I teach in the grad program, and I also teach in the undergrad program, and I'm also the chair of the undergrad, so I kind of have different hats and roles, all of which I enjoy immensely. The studio itself is one of the few studios on the architecture side that are kind of scrutinizing our forced reoccupation of space due to COVID-19. So I'm really focused on this, the now, and thinking about the near future, and I guess the continuing future. I'm interested in how physical and imagined boundaries are being redrawn due to COVID, and there is a parallel drawing project that we'll be interfacing with in the studio called Drawing Normal Now. And so I use the term bubbles in the brief and over again in the video because I feel like it's something that it's kind of in our collective consciousness right now. We know that we're told that our bubbles are safe, they're nice and round and perfect, but and they're also the subject of much kind of spatial speculation, fantastical spatial speculation by architects and artists, but they are historically very problematic. I mean, the idea that you live in a bubble is not a good thing. So this studio hopes to study bubbles, to problematize bubbles, and to seek a potential for new constellations of people and places within as boundaries are redrawn and shift.
Terrific. Thank you, Madi. Ms. Thina Tak.
Thanks, Blair. So my last name, right? Hi everyone, my name is Dina. As Blair said, I'm running the studio when it's not all about you. And I totally forgot to introduce myself in the video, so I'm super sorry. But I have a B arc and an M arc, so double whammy. And then I actually worked both after undergrad and grad. And then I recently switched to teaching full-time a few years ago. And I think, yeah, I think that's it. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Fina. And then last but absolutely not least, James.
Did he make it?
He made it. James is here.
All right, just unmute was taking a bit of time. So, hello everyone. So I have a couple updates regarding, my name's James Humler and I'm teaching Future Islands. So the future of Ontario Place in Toronto. And our studio, as my presentation said, will be working parallel to a larger Canada-wide student competition. Just a couple facts about that competition that have come out since I made the presentation. One, the competition will be a group project, and I think in my presentation I kind of stated the fact. Ideally, the teams are interdisciplinary, so that means it's possible that you could work with someone outside the studio on your project as part of the team, even if they're not part of that studio. And then also the competition deadline will be January 3rd. So that means that we will not kind of be approaching the studio as if we're preparing you for the competition submission, but the final review will be kind of an opportunity for you to get feedback before your submission. And of course, not everyone who takes the studio has to join the competition at all. You know, the competition is a great opportunity, but we're going to be looking at, a whole set of issues beyond just the focus of the competition as well. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you, James. And thanks everybody for the introductions. Like I said, I think the options and the things that the faculty are offering for you to explore and to look at this year, it's a great list of studios, and I think that there are plenty of things that everybody will find interesting and find productive. Janus, I am going to ask you to speak just really briefly about the ballot process and what the students, one, need to do, and two, can expect in terms of both making their choices known and then what they can expect in terms of when they'll find out what studio they're in, et cetera.
Sure. I sort of told Chris earlier, but I don't think everyone was in the room yet. And I've sent emails out to students as well, so you should be aware. But in case, so we sent out the ballot for the studio selection last week, and that will be closing tomorrow at noon. So just make sure you have your ballot in by noon tomorrow. You don't get a redo, so make sure you've made your choices. And then Adam and I will do the studio sort of that afternoon and the next morning, and we'll be posting on the Miro page on Thursday at noon. So that's about it. If anyone has any questions, it's pretty straightforward. You submit your votes, and then we sort you, and then we announce it. And normally when this happens, people are running to their desks, so I'm not sure what the equivalent of that is going to be this year, but we'll see.
And one scared straight story, there have been students in the past that didn't vote and they simply get seated. And they've grumbled about it and they stayed where they were seated. So do vote. It's important that you get your ballots in if you want to have some control over where it is that you end up. And so, also Janus and Adam work really hard to make sure that you get one of your top 3 or so choices. It's not always a perfect system, but we have a pretty good track record of making sure that people land somewhere that they're interested in landing. So as you make your list, make sure you make it deep enough so that there are some options, and think really hard about your choices, because I think like any one of these that have been described, I think is a perfectly great studio to take. So yeah, just be thoughtful and be reasonable about how you're organizing things. All right,
So,
Case?
Yeah, what I would suggest is perhaps for efficiency, perhaps before kind of opening the floor to the questions for studio instructors, are there any questions specific to what Janus has just said? You can either type it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and speak up. So are there any questions surrounding the procedural matters of kind of studio? There's one. Sahar is asking, do landscape architecture studios have to take at least one large vertical studio? Yeah, that's correct. And for, you know, I didn't touch base with Blair about this, but I think if you're interested in taking a studio in another program, please, you know, communicate that with us as well. As mentioned by the studio instructors, I think there's a great offering available for studios that are exciting for both landscape architecture and architecture studios. So that's what we're trying to cultivate in Sala. So that's totally fine, but make sure
there's a max of one per program. So you can take one landscape if you're an architecture student and vice versa.
Great.
Right. You're not required to, but you have
No,
that.
no. Yeah.
You have that option.
Can I ask a question?
No.
Hi, Joanna.
I am supposed to take an architecture studio this term because I took a landscape one last year. However, there are a limited amount of landscape studios, obviously, this year. There's only 3 compared to 8 architecture, which is a little bit worrisome coming from a Markle student. Just because I've actually worked with 2 out of 3 of the professors for the landscape studios. I haven't worked with Daniel yet. And I was just wondering if there could be a little bit more wiggle room within the architecture studios so that they would potentially be counted as landscape studios. For example, Dan and Chad's seems to have a really strong landscape thread, and I know that they have experience in landscape architecture. And I just don't really want to be, I guess, pigeonholed into only taking landscape studios if other architecture studios. I had the same problem last year, and I know Blair, we discussed this, where there could be crossover, but they were only considered architecture or landscape studios without really the, I guess, consideration of the specific content of each studio.
That's great. I mean, maybe for efficiency's sake, we can take this offline, but make sure to kind of get back to you ahead of, you know, by tonight, so you can still adjust your vote. And I think we'll include John in that thread, as he's been working with Cynthia on the Markla curriculum. So we'll circulate back about that, but it's a great point.
Joanna, if you could initiate an email copying Case, John, and myself, and we'll.
Yeah, I already started the process, but thank
right.
you.
Yeah, I'm getting an email from Cynthia as we speak about this.
Thanks.
It does seem like the kind of thing you want to have some kind of consistent position about, across, not just specific to one student, no?
Yeah.
But why you take it offline.
That's why we're taking it offline.
Okay, any other kind of procedural-ish questions before we open it up to questions for studio instructors?
Hey Keith, yeah, just piggybacking off Joanna there, thank you. It's Brandon. I've been at the school for a little bit now, so I'm kind of finding I've had studios from over half of the instructors here. Is it assumed that I'm kind of putting those ones to the wayside, still trying to look at what I'm interested in, but is it assumed that I'm taking a studio that I have not had the chance of meeting that professor in a studio environment? Or is it just like if I want to take someone else's again, do I just do that?
Yeah, I think it's a personal choice. You know, there's obviously reasons that any individual might have to kind of explore instructors that they haven't encountered before. But if you have a very good relationship with someone and you kind of like their philosophy, then there's no reason not to do that again. Okay. So it's totally up to you.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys. That was it.
I also have a question about Markla program.
Go ahead.
Yep.
So I have advanced placement in architecture. So now I have to take one landscape vertical studio and one architecture vertical studio. Does it mean I have to take one of each?
Are you a Markla student or an AP architecture student?
I'm Markla student.
A Markla student.
Yes.
It sounds like you have AP in Markla, which would mean that your studios would be weighted toward landscape architecture, and you should work with, I guess, Adam Janus to study the requirements.
Yeah, but he should have been given a trajectory. So I would just say follow the trajectory that you were given. But if you have any questions about that trajectory, just email Adam.
Thanks. The trajectory I have, it says I need to take one architecture vertical and one landscape vertical.
In the same term?
No, not in the same term, just like across my 4 years.
Yeah, so I think then if that's the case, I would say you're free to choose either architecture or landscape architecture this year. If you're taking architecture this year, then next time around you would have to take landscape architecture.
Oh, so I have to take one of each in my 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're in the Markla program.
Right.
Thank you.
But you're taking, 6 or 7 studios, so it just requires that you take a minimum of one of those each, it sounds like.
My advice would be to take the studio you're most interested in at this point, because it's your first one.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
So I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So if everyone that has specific questions can hang on till the end, we'll now go over to questions specific to the studio instructors. So feel free to post them in the chat box if you don't feel comfortable speaking up. And the advantage of posting something in a chat box might be that studio instructors might be able to respond in the chat box. If you want to speak out and speak up and unmute yourself, that's fine too. So for Chad and Dan, will work be individual or in groups? Ree is asking.
The first assignment will be in groups. It's structured as a dialogue essentially between two people, two beings. So there'll be kind of role play which goes on. So that is the requisite quote unquote group work that will happen. And for the second and final assignment, that is a little bit up in the air depending on how the first goes. But I think we're gonna encourage people to work in groups, but that it won't be mandatory. So there's a bit of A and B. I don't know if you want to add to that, Daniel.
No, just that we're the first assignment is interested in the possibility of sort of dialogue and exchange as a design process, and so that's why we're going to experiment with that with the first assignment.
So great. So then there's a question if each instructor can briefly say just one sentence. Is it mostly in teams or individual? So Mari, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Shall I answer the questions in the chat or just answer the question you just?
I'm just answering William Hansen's question.
So there's 3 major projects, and the first 2 are individual, and the third 2, sorry, the third project, you have the option of teaming up or working individually if you choose. But the first 2 are individual. And to answer some questions, since I have the mic that are kind of related, further down, the first one's research-based, the second one is drawing-based, and the third one is, full research, drawing, design, speculation, multimodal.
Great. So maybe we can shift to Fionn, and he can maybe answer the dual question of if Virgin Cruises is indeed a real company or a made-up one, and if you're doing mostly individual or group projects.
The first half of the term will be in group. The second half will be the option of individual or group. Virgin Voyages is a real company. It was scheduled to launch already, but won't be until potentially October. But they are not our real clients. Instead, they're going to serve as an imaginary client for the project.
Great, thank you. So Tina, maybe you can answer the group versus individual question, and then Ayman is asking about the design charrettes in the second part. Will everyone be working on the same design challenge, or will they be setting their own programs?
So in regards to the individual and team, first project is basically like 90% teamwork, and those groups will be in 2 to 3 depending how the numbers work out. So it's like if there's 12 students, then groups of 2. If there's 13, then groups of 2 and 1 group of 3. For the second and third project, highly encouraged our groups. I said that kind of like how Yoda speaks, but groups are highly encouraged, especially if you're a second year, because I think the studio, like the Miyazaki stuff is supposed to be fun, obviously, but the underlying issues that we're going to be dealing with are actually pretty difficult. For those of you that are in AP, I ran 2 other studios that also dealt with non-human entities. So this is part of that ongoing series. And just through my experience, these are difficult issues. So I really would recommend group work, but they're not mandatory. And then what was the other question?
It's a question about charrettes.
Oh, yeah. The charrette is basically, yeah, you guys will have the same exercise, the same prompt, and then the last exercise will be defining your own site and coding a user.
And perhaps Rachel's question is to everyone, but maybe since you have the floor, are there any physical model making expectations?
Not explicitly, but but if I think that, okay, so model making will, I mean, obviously encouraged and supported. It's not explicitly like one of the exercises though. I think the studio will engage more so the medium of film and like using websites, making websites, like, yeah, so good.
That works.
So I think Kelly, I assume that you're asking a question for Daniel Rohr. Daniel, what media will you be using for the design process?
I will be using digital and hand, so hand drawing at the beginning and then also digital media. And we also be doing model making, but obviously we are at home, so we'll be doing traditional model making. So no laser cut and CC, but traditional handmade models will be required. And but specifically at the beginning, it will be a lot of hand drawing and then also digital, but also video making and audio video.
Okay, maybe I'll pass it to Leslie and some others that haven't spoken. Maybe you can also integrate Alexander T's question. If beyond Miro, there will be other platforms that you'll be integrating into the studio. So Leslie, maybe you want to start about model making, about group or individual, and the other tools that come into travel, imaginary travel.
So my studio will be primarily individual. During the part of the semester where we're on the road, as I mentioned earlier, paths of students will cross inevitably, and those will be opportunities if the students want to do a short collaboration. But most of the work will be individual, and all the building designs will be individual. I'm not the most tech-savvy faculty member, so I'm probably not the best one to lead off on Alexander's question. Regarding physical models, we will not certainly will not require those. If students want to make them, they're welcome to, but they won't be a big part of the studio. So,
thank you. Chris McDonald, do you want to answer those questions as well?
I posted in the chat, basically the first 2 weeks are individual, and that's partly for me to get a sense of what all of the students have in their toolkit, and then assigning groups of 3 to 4, depending on numbers, etc. And then there'll be this large, initially a kind of urban design strategy, and then we'll work our way into the scale of buildings per se as it seems fit. I see Miro really, apart from a place where we meet for pinups and things, as more of a student space, not necessarily my space, but a place where students can get together, and particularly when we form into groups of 3 and 4 and kind of reshuffle the analog, virtual analog of the studio space. Otherwise, largely communicating through Zoom, but our professional colleagues in Montreal use a kind of Microsoft version of Zoom, and I have to just kind of make a decision with them if they're happy working either way. Physical models, I think there are times when nothing else will do, but also, you know, duct tape and cardboard is a perfectly acceptable medium to build models which help you visualize and clarify spatial ideas. So it doesn't have to be fancy. But, you know, generally because of communicating online, I mean, of course, there will be a privilege of whether they're hand-drawn and scanned drawings or digital drawings saved as PDFs and marked up, but, you know, usual kind of rigmarole. So anyway, we'll see as we go. I'm enthusiastic about it, and I've, apart from finishing the studio in the spring, I also taught a seminar in the early part of the summer, and was pretty positive about the results, to be honest. I mean, we had some great conversations online, and so I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Annie, you want to elaborate on any of those questions?
I think there was a question about group work. So the first few investigations are going to be individual, and then we're going to do analysis on the site. And then for the last portion, you can choose to work individually or work in teams of 2 to 3.
Great. James?
So the first project is individual, and then the next 2 projects, just because it's required by the competition, are group projects. I would possibly be open to an individual project if you're not submitting as part of the competition. But if you are submitting as part of the competition, it will have to be a group project.
And Inga and John, if you want to elaborate on what you already responded in the chat, feel free to do so.
Yeah, maybe just a few words. There are 4 exercises. The first 3, as it's set up as a lab, there are individual, but we coming together and we sharing them. And there's usually a second part of the exercise where then the 2 come together and share information to move forward. The architectural part of it, I would leave it open because there could be quite different parts in terms of size, and so there could be pairs or there could be an individual project, and we will discuss depending on what comes out of the 3rd exercise.
Great. John, anything you wanted to add on to what you've already mentioned?
Just in terms of the working environment, you know, we're going to have online community conversations and conversations with the network of people involved in the work on the park. And so, I mean, I see that as a real opportunity for us to extend our reach into places that we normally wouldn't have very good access to or wouldn't think to. In terms of Miro, like Chris, I see it more as a space for students. I imagine it will evolve over the course of the term, and imagine that I will be using my iPad sketching app quite a lot. over the course of a day in the studio.
Thank you. Chris, maybe it's easier to, maybe you might be typing away, but Kendra had a question about the site and structure for your studio.
Yeah, I thought I described that in the little video, but so the first 2 weeks are individual, and you'll be designing the same program as the first house that Arthur Erickson designed, which is the first Gordon Smith house, basically in the forest in the North Shore. And as I say, that's partly for me to get some familiarity with your skill set. And the other thing, the sort of working title for the studio is Unprecedented Yet Familiar. So I'll just give you the version of the Gordon Smith House #1, and then you'll take that program and develop something of your own and try and fit in with that kind of, I know, slightly problematic pairing of ambitions. And then we're doing it would be in Vancouver terms about the equivalent of 4 or 5 city blocks west of downtown Toronto, anchored by an existing building, which in itself is not so special, but it represents the kind of industrial typology that would have existed at a certain moment in Toronto's history. And the amount of time we'll spend as an urban structures kind of design, and the amount of time that we will then devolve into individual building design is kind of up to the class, depending on everybody's appetite and mine and our collaborators.
Excellent. Fionn, maybe you can. There were 2 questions. I think one you already, Kelly's question you already answered, and then there's a question about your forensic matters. Yeah. You're typing away? Okay. Stina, are the projects related of your?
Are the projects related? Yes. So essentially, the first project is like cultivating, for lack of a better word, cultivating themes and observations from the films, and then based on, you know, it's really dependent on what each student and each group finds, let's say, just interesting. And then you carry that with you through the project. So the idea is that the second and third project essentially offer you the opportunity to spatialize those themes that you are interested in. Ideally, you carry the same theme throughout the second and third project, but if you like try something out the second project and you're like, you know what, this is, I'm like, don't love it and I want to switch gears, you can do that for the third project. But ideally, yeah, you would carry the same themes through.
Great. Well, I think John just answered Ivana's question. I think with that, we covered everyone's questions. If you know, skipped someone, please speak up.
Sorry, Ron. There was a question to us about what our deliverables and sort of media of choice will be in our Cascadia studio, and just that there will be a few specific media deliverables for the first exercise, but beyond that, or in addition to that, the studio is really interested in representation, sort of an expanded repertoire of representation, both political representation as well as visual or graphic representation. And so we are expecting that students will bring their own initiative and ideas and obsessions to the work and sort of explore and hopefully take risks with how that's developed in sort of individual projects, and that we will, on our part, will meet the students on their into what they're interested in and help them to, you know, work out appropriate media to sort of tell the story. Maybe that's an answer.
That's great.
Hi, I just have questions for Inga. I think my question got skipped, so.
Apologies.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for Inga, you mentioned about that the studio might extend it to Wednesday as like an external class time in the video. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so do you mind a little bit about
Okay, so no, the Wednesday I just set apart. I said it the first exercises when we explore, when we maybe have to come together to how we present things, so more technical part. On the second part of the studio, I want to use the extra afternoon, if needed, to have more time to do individual crits, rather than having the really long days. But we can, it's not a mandatory day. It's just I'm offering this space that I could spread out the individual work with students.
Yeah, so like for some of our students who has GP, then the GP is like Wednesday afternoon. So is it possible for like some of the GP students to change for a different time?
Yeah, like I said, I set this out, and it would not be the full class. So if you have something else, then of course I will talk to you in the regular studio time. This is just, I wanted to set this time that I could, if the days would get too long, that I have the Wednesday afternoon. But that's more on an individual base.
Okay, thank you.
Chad, another question for you, and Daniel as well. Can you please elaborate on the role of the lecturers and guests in the studio?
That's for me?
No, it's for Chad and Daniel.
Okay.
Chad seems to have left already. Oh no.
Oh, did I stop? Yep, I think I'm here. The lectures will be thematized, so we're trying to look overall at a kind of idea about region and what makes region, what makes place. So we're breaking that down through a series of seminars and lectures. We are inviting in, we have 4 people lined up at the moment. One guest speaker will talk about Indigenous governance and space, basically looking at how traditions and histories have come to evolve, have sort of evolved into decision-making protocols, and how that means things are shared between people and how things are decided upon based on landscape traits, based on histories. We're looking at bringing in an expert on geology, so kind of a base level of understanding about what actually supports the region physically, a climatologist from the University of Washington, again, looking at a kind of overlay of what supports the biological system here. And then also perhaps a historian /, kind of someone who's a bit more interested in the cultural commentary of what makes up Cascadia. I don't know if Danny, you want to add to that at all?
No, just, I mean, in a perfect world, we'd be going on a field trip and gallivanting and traveling around the region for the entire term and getting a sense of the ground and getting a sense of the culture and systems and sort of agents operating here and how they get along or don't. And so in the absence of that, and since we are definitely not experts on this region by any stretch of the imagination, we thought it would be useful and to try and create that sort of immersion as well as we can virtually.
Great.
Oh, sorry, maybe I'll just add that in sort of supplement to the quote unquote experts, I think we're going to have a series of lectures that Daniel and I will present as a kind of, again, a dialogue between oppositional, contrasting, or I don't know, alternative viewpoints that are out there in Cascadia.
Terrific. Thank you, folks. I think we're running up against the clock here, but I feel like a lot of information has been imparted upon everybody. One of the things I'd like to point out, it looks like to a person, all the faculty have have indicated in the chat that they are willing to build in a little bit of flexibility into the schedule to want to accommodate folks and Zoom fatigue, but also to those of you who aren't in an adjacent time zone or close by to us, we will be working the best that we can to help accommodate you. We recognize that some of you are on the opposite side of the globe, which is both really exciting and at times somewhat challenging. So it looks like everybody's willing to build in a bit of flexibility and try to find times where you can meet in person. And I think across the board, the faculty and the staff will be working the best they can to make sure that everybody has the best opportunity to access us and each other.
Meet in person, virtually, that is.
Yeah, virtually, not in person. Not in person. So yet, someday we will meet in person. Case, can you think of anything else, or do you want to call this a meeting?
Yeah, I would say like maybe for the students that had very specific questions, like we kind of started off with the Q&A, feel free to hang. I'll offer myself for the next like 10 minutes to stick around, and I'm not sure if Janus is able to hang around for a little bit longer too. Otherwise, feel free to email the studio instructors if you have last-minute questions. They may be able to respond to you before the noon deadline tomorrow. And otherwise, good luck with your choices.
Yep, and have a great studio this year, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and thanks, faculty members, for the great discussion.
Can I ask one question for Janus?
Of course, sure.
Sure. Just wondering if once we get our studios, is it possible to email them before Friday? Do you think you'll have them in the faculty resource, or no?
Oh yeah, I think they should be all in their proper studio sections by Thursday late afternoon.
I have a question. Do we need to wait until we meet the students to find out what time zone they're in?
Yes, because
well,
no, as soon as they're assigned in your section within Canvas, there's even like a time zone. I can show you. There's a way to kind of see where the time zones are, which time zones the students are in. So yeah, but obviously you won't know until they've been assigned into your section.
I saw a question from Madison, just asking, are there ranked choices weighted higher for upper year students or towards the program you're in, March students and March Studio? I wouldn't say based on the program, although we are trying to create a balance of students switching over into the other program. We try to keep that number balanced. So that's one thing that we're working with. And then in terms of the upper year students, we definitely try to get them in their first choice. But again, it really depends who chooses which studio. It's a huge puzzle that we do, and we try to get everyone their top choice, but obviously that usually doesn't happen. But we're usually able to get in your top 3, but don't quote me on it. I haven't seen the results yet.
All right, everyone.
Thanks so much for organizing